Hey Kev, let's follow this trail over here. This looks like there might be something waiting down there.
All right. Hey, wait a minute. Do you hear that?
Yeah, I thought it was just me. What the heck is that?
I don't know what that is. Whoa, do you smell that too?
That's unbelievable. Hey, look.
What the?
Hey, look, those branches are moving over there.
What the heck is that?
Holy cow, is that what I think it is? Look at that thing.
Oh my God.
It's a freaking Sasquatch. Welcome to the Bigfoot Terror in the Woods Sightings and Encounters podcast. My name is W.J. Sheehan, author of the series of books Bigfoot Terror in the Woods Sightings and Encounters, mucho volumes, available in paperback, ebook, and audio format at Amazon and Audible. And that includes my latest series, which is just about wrapping up, which is regional. The regional series is comprised of previously written and recorded stories organized by regions in North America. So check that out, folks. Pick up a copy or two and enjoy yourself. And now, may I introduce you to my brother and co-host, KJ Sheehan. Kev, how are you today?
I'm doing great, Bill, other than being a little chilly down here in North Carolina.
Yes, I think it's a little chilly everywhere.
Normally, we don't have much to complain about, and compared to northern cities, we don't have much to complain about. But it's all relative, It's I went out this morning to the garbage can, and it was 22 degrees and blowing a gale.
Yeah, nice, right?
That's just chilly.
Yeah,
for me.
Yeah, well, 22 and a gale, you're probably in the low teens. So I don't know. Yeah, I'm not too fond of the cold, but what are you going to do?
Exactly.
We will get through it. Damn it. So what are we doing today, bro, in our cryptids in the news and other oddities segment?
Yeah, we're going to do something a little different. We're going to do a ghost story, a little haunting. But it's a local one. So it's I can't believe I haven't talked about it before. And when I started to research it, I was like, whoa, all right. I should have definitely talked about this before. And honestly, it's a little creepier.
Now, when you say local, Kev, local to you, local to me, local to who?
Local to me, especially when I'm living out on the coast.
Okay.
So as my brother knows and some of our listeners know, I spend a good amount of my time down on the coast of southeastern North Carolina. Very near a Civil War fort there called Fort Fisher.
Okay.
And we're going to talk about Fort Fisher today.
Okay, interesting. Is the fort still intact?
It's intact as a museum.
Okay.
And they just actually, a little public service announcement, they just spent millions of dollars redoing the museum. And it opened a few weeks ago, and I actually haven't been in the new museum yet. Okay. So I got to do that on one of these cold winter days.
Yeah, go over and see what they have, Hey, listen, just as a side note that you're jumping into some type of ghost or haunting, a friend of the podcast that I had been talking to went to a Titanic museum. And my understanding is there's a lot of little Titanic museums around now, different entities that bought artifacts, from all of these dives down onto the Titanic. But interesting to note that when he was at the museum, not only he, but many of the visitors, their electronic devices, phones and Apple Watches and all kinds of things were failing while they were around these items from the Titanic. I thought that was interesting. And this guy's very credible. He's not BSing me,
And not just because they were in a Faraday cage of sorts.
Yeah, exactly,
Well, these steel a lot of these buildings are made out of steel now, with steel studs and stuff.
Yep.
And people think of it like a normal house, but when you go in there with your phone, it's what's called a Faraday cage. It blocks all the signals.
That's right.
Coming in or out.
That's right. And it was around a particular display.
Okay.
Nowhere else in the building other than when you approached this display that was there. So I found that interesting, but who knows? We don't have all the answers. But go ahead, Kev. Shoot.
Yeah, and we'll talk a little bit about a couple of those phenomena in the ghost hunting world and get your opinion on. We haven't talked about before, but they come up in this story.
Okay.
So, this fort is pretty interesting. So I'm going to spend probably a good amount of time talking about the fort because it's unlike any other fort I've seen before. So I think it's interesting in itself.
Okay.
But the fort, we'll start with where it is. So it was used in the Civil War to guard the mouth of the Cape Fear River.
Okay.
And the Cape Fear River, folks, is in southeastern North Carolina. It's not, a lot of people think it forms the border between South Carolina and North Carolina. But when you go across the Cape Fear, it's still North Carolina. If you go across from north to south, it's still part of North Carolina there. And it's a treacherous body of water, the Cape Fear, even today. It's, I do some fishing on it, and it's shocking, actually, how it has a very wide mouth to the river, and there's a channel in it that can take large shipping vessels down the center of it, but off to the sides of it, and I don't mean close to the shore, pretty far away from the shore, it's only about 4 feet deep. And it shifts all the time. So there's sandbars and stuff present. After a big storm, you'll see an island pop up in the middle of the Cape Fear.
Yeah, that's a dangerous scenario. That's like Mauritius Inlet.
Yeah.
Mauritius Inlet is marked as like a hazard.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter. It's permanently marked as a hazard because, there are shoals building up, shifting sands. Even if you stand there and look by the riprap, you can just see as the tide changes. There's a lot of crazy stuff going on there. And I'm sure that's like the Cape Fear, but the Cape Fear is probably much bigger than Mauritius.
Well, I was going to say, and this is miles across.
Wow, okay, that's a big...
Miles across.
Yep.
So, and I'll tell you a quick fishing story. I may have told you before, but I don't think I've told our listeners. So we go out there fishing on the south side of the Cape Fear River. I live on the north side of the Cape Fear River, between the Cape Fear and the ocean.
Okay.
So it's a little sliver of land.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're on the south side, it's kind of marshes and riverways off of the river. And the fishing in there is pretty good, but it's a big maze.
Mm-hmm.
It's very shallow, probably 3 feet deep tops. And so we go in there with an outboard and fish around. And we were coming out one night in the evening. The sun was going down. And, we got over to the south side of the Cape Fear, so heading for home. And a big freighter was coming down the center of the channel. And, one of those ships that has 500 containers on it. Container ships. And huge. And it's coming down, and they move at a good clip, even coming into port. And the port, by the way, on the Cape Fear is Wilmington, North Carolina. Pretty big shipping port.
Okay.
So they come cruising down there, probably doing about 10 to 15 knots. And I'm like, wow, that's pretty cool. That thing's moving. And we're watching it, and what's interesting is it's throwing a wake that looks to be about 4 feet tall when it's in the channel, but then as the wake came out and hit the shallower water that we were in, hundreds of yards away from the ship, it got to be about 12 feet tall.
Wow.
So all of a sudden, we're in this 15-foot skiff, and there's a 12-foot breaking wave coming at us.
Wow.
And I thought for sure I was going swimming.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a big wave, man. 12-foot wave.
It's a big wave,
yeah.
And what happens is, though, of course, the water stacks up. It's a big wave, partially above the water and below the water in the deeper water. But then when it hits the shallow water, it kind of stacks up vertically.
Yeah, and that's what happens anywhere where you have surf on the beach.
Right.
that momentum, that tonnage of water hits the shallow area, and it has nowhere to go but get pushed up. And, of course, that forms the surf, right?
All right, so let's go back to the fort. You have the setting of the Cape Fear River.
Okay.
And this fort was built between the ocean and the river. Basically, it had the ocean on one side and the river on the other. A few acres, not hundreds of acres of land. And it was an earthen fort.
Okay.
So I don't remember ever seeing one of these where it really didn't have a big wall around it or anything like that, but it has these mounds of earth, probably a dozen of them.
Okay.
That are like 30 or 40 feet high, covered in grass, and some of them had cannons and still have cannons on top of them.
Okay.
And really high-powered cannons, so this was in the Civil War. You had those rifled barrels
Yes.
of large cannons, so they could shoot miles. And this fort was built basically to defend the port of Wilmington, defend the mouth of the Cape Fear River. It was a southern fort, so from the Southern Army, the rebels, or the Rebs, as we lovingly call them down here, they manned Fort Fisher. And this huge earthen fort was very successfully defending the mouth of the Cape Fear River. And this is where you get the term of, even though it just escaped me a minute here, I got to look at my notes, of the ships that used to go up and down here. Blockade runners, sorry.
Okay.
So the blockade runners were, these ships that kept the Southern Army going, basically, during the Civil War, when the much stronger Union Army would put up a naval blockade of a river like the Cape Fear. And these small blockade runners were fast, they were low in the water, so they had a very low profile, so they were stealthy in their own way, they were hard to see, and they also knew the local bodies of water as best they could. They still would run aground and stuff like that too. But they would bring supplies in and out of the Cape Fear, even though there was a naval blockade. And this fort would help the blockade runners to keep that port open. And what I didn't realize until I was doing this research was in 1865, by 1865, near the end of the Civil War, Wilmington was the last remaining supply route open to Robert E. Lee's army of Northern Virginia. Ooh. So that was the only way they could get supplies.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Civil War.
So it was a really important port and a really important fort as well.
Okay. Now, it's interesting, Civil War history is, there's so much depth to it and such a variety when you really dig into it. There was a lot going on. There was a lot of moving pieces all over the place, and that's why Civil War buffs pay such attention to the details, in these various battles and engagements and who was doing what, where, when, and how,
Yeah, exactly. And this fort was there, basically for the whole time of the Civil War, from 1861 to 1865. But they got a new general a couple of years into the war, and he really reinforced the place and built more earthen mounds and really took it to the next level and trained his troops to basically fight to the death of this place. And after he came on board, they got attacked by the Union Army and the Union Navy, and a pretty big attack. A lot of people lost their lives, but they were able to defend it and keep the mouth of the river open, and that was in 1862. And then in 1865, basically a few months before the end of the Civil War, probably contributing to the end of the Civil War as well, they had the Union Army put a huge attack on Fort Fisher, and the fort fell. It was a massive amphibious assault on January 15th, 1865. And, basically here's where the haunting starts. 3,000 soldiers from, in combination of both sides, the North and the South, lost their lives in bloody hand-to-hand combat at Fort Fisher.
Wow.
And there's some spectacular paintings of the battle that are brutal. These Civil War battles, they were like, especially in a case like this where, it was like an amphibious assault, so not a lot of horseback stuff. People on foot with sabers and rifles.
Yeah,
coming in.
I don't know about you, Kev. Sometimes I just enter into these scenarios in my mind's eye, and picture the engagement. And really, it just had to be hell.
Hell. No, I was thinking the same thing.
I mean, just
like
people.
This was hell.
Yeah,
you knew you were going to die.
Yeah, and if you weren't going to die, you'd be lucky. And you didn't know if somebody was just going to run a saber through your back while you were engaging somebody else or hack your arm off. It's just freaking...
No, and you have rifle bullets going by left and right. Then you have mortar shells coming in. Cannon fire coming in from the ocean and from the other side of the river at the fort.
Yeah.
And that was kind of, you mentioned luck. That cannon fire coming in, even if you're a Union soldier firing the cannon shots, you got a good chance of dying.
Yeah. There's no doubt about it. It was just like a maelstrom of death.
Right.
Raining down, or then when the landing occurs and everybody's coming in, and now you're engaging with rifle fire, and then eventually, coming face to face with your opponent, Oh my God, man!
Yeah, so 3,000 people lose their lives in brutal combat, which leads, I'm sure, to some of the hauntings. Now, so to make it real, this all happened about 1.5 miles from where I live.
Okay.
And, you come out there now, and it's this beautiful, peaceful area with these trees called live oaks. Folks in the South will know them, where they're all kind of twisty and, like, weathered in the wind, but beautiful trees kind of low to the earth, that have adapted to grow up on the hurricane coast, And a lot of people take their wedding pictures there and stuff like that. And it's right here on the setting where these 3,000 people died. Mm-hmm. And what I started to hear over the past few years, I'd be out to dinner. Maybe I'd be by myself and I'm sitting at a bar in, one of my favorite restaurants. And people would be talking about the haunting of Fort Fisher. And I'd be like, of course I perk up when you're talking about a cryptid or a haunting, My ears perk up. And they talk about hearing voices down on this fort and on the beach on either side of the fort. A lot of people talk about it. So they'll be out there at night, and it's super quiet, right? There's nothing there. It's one of my favorite places, too, by the way, to go and look up at the sky at night, at the stars, because there's no natural lighting. It's dark and there's really no one around,
Mm-hmm.
And they hear voices, a lot of voices, like talking to one another, but they can't make out what they're saying. But I mean, lots and lots of people hear these voices. And then they see often these orbs floating along in the trees, which we hear that a lot, that description related to supernatural stuff, right? And then
Kev, what do you make of these orbs floating around during these supernatural engagements, these events?
I mean, to me, well, first of all, it's a whole mixed bag. A lot of times people will see these orbs on their camera devices, their Ring doorbells and their Ring spotlight cameras. And those, I don't think those are ghosts. I think those are like aphid bugs and stuff like that are really close to the lens, so they look like this blurry, glowing orb. It's a bug. It's not necessarily an orb. But in a situation like this, I think it's some type of energy source from the other side, so to speak. Some way. And of course, these ghost hunters, have these tools, which I think are legit for measuring the energy.
Mm-hmm. No, they are. I mean, it's easy enough in this day and age. There's plenty of ways to just electronically measure wavelengths.
Yep.
it's relatively easy cheesy in the world of science today to take measurements of a variety of different things with all even with the price point of things that you could buy now that before were completely unavailable. You could go out and buy some really interesting stuff for under $100 or a couple of $100. So, and it's good technology too. I mean, this stuff is not bogus.
Yep. And one of the ghosts that people seem to come in contact with when they're identified is this gentleman called Colonel William Lamb. Mm-hmm. And he's the colonel that came in July of 1862 and really built the place up and brought in more soldiers and, really brought in the spirit of what became a mighty fort under his leadership. And he was killed in the battle, probably violently, you would imagine. Mm-hmm. And then, talking of listening and seeing these orbs and listening to these voices, I've seen a couple of folks that have, published stuff on YouTube. And they go in, these ghost hunters, and they use like the divining rods, right? You've seen that, Bill.
Yeah.
Traditionally, you think of them as looking for water with them. But they use it as a way to communicate, in theory, with these spirits. And, basically saying, like, if you're here and you are a Union soldier ghost, make the rods cross, the divining rods cross. And these guys, they seem legit. Again, I don't know, but they seem like they can have a conversation with some of these spirits that are walking around. And there are, in fact, like tens of soldiers from both sides that seem to haunt the area around this fort where they lost their lives.
Wow.
So there's a lot going on down there. And I haven't been down there to the fort since doing this research. And I'm pretty excited and also a little creeped out because I walk around there at night a lot. And if I start hearing voices, other than the voices I normally hear. So pretty interesting, this whole thing. And folks, if you ever get a chance, you're down in eastern North Carolina. A lot of people go to the Outer Banks. This is well south of the Outer Banks, and really down at the tip on the northern side of the Cape Fear River. First of all, beautiful scenery, spectacular place, beautiful beaches. But this fort is spectacular. And now seeing this new museum, which is massive, by the way, Bill. The old museum was like, the typical maybe few hundred square foot shack, single story. The new one is multi-story, and it looks like, kind of like a huge spaceship landed there. It's massive, Pretty wild.
Wow, man. Interesting stuff. Very interesting stuff.
The haunting of Fort Fisher, North Carolina.
Yeah, crazy, man. That is crazy stuff. Well, I got a couple of interesting Bigfoot accounts here. Now, let me see if I do one or I do two. We'll see how it rolls out. Both very interesting. And let me just dig into it here. I think our listeners for sure are going to find these fascinating. This first one came from a Megan Schuler, resident of Washington State. And she shared this following hair-raising encounter with me. Basically, this is what Megan had to say. She said, as you know, Bill, my husband David, who shared this encounter with me, is not with me anymore. I thought I owed it to him and myself to bring to the forefront what it was that happened to us that day in the Klamath National Forest. At my age, coupled with it having happened so long ago, if I should fudge the facts from loss of memory, I promise you, I will not misstate what happened. In 1975, David and I had a 1963 or 64 Ford Country Squire station wagon that we nicknamed Old Betsy, which is not necessarily original, many others using the same name. It was black with a wood grain side on it and a maroon or red interior. If you folded down the rear seats, it had enough room in it so we could lay out 2 sleeping bags in the back, the 2 of us using it as our camper. So this sets the stage, folks, for what's about to happen. It may sound odd to some, but this was the perfect compromise, not being able to afford a trailer or anything else at the time. We could turn the heat on and warm up if needed. We had ventilation and protection from the elements. And it was as easy as 1, 2, 3 to both get in and out of locations when we wanted to. All we had to do was gas and go. So on this weekend stint, we had planned to go berry picking and hike around for a couple of days in what I believe was the Klamath National Forest, or very close to it. Berry picking was nothing new to either of us, the 2 of us practicing sustainable harvesting, which is, quite simply, never taking more than 10% of any available patch. And at the time, I think legally we were not allowed to harvest more than a gallon per day. So that weekend we were picking huckleberries. And between you and me, we always wore jingle bells, sang funny little songs, and made plenty of noise when picking, knowing that the bears like the same berries. That's interesting, huh? People wearing jingle bells and singing songs.
Oh, yeah. We used to wear the bells hiking out there and went huckleberry picking up in Washington State when we lived there.
Wow. So there you go, Kev. You're spot on with what she's saying here.
Yeah, and by the way, I got a little related quick story there about the bells.
Go ahead.
So, do you know how you can tell grizzly bear scat from brown bear or black bear scat?
Have no idea.
Grizzly bear scat has bells in it.
They were snacking on some pickers. I love that. Well, let me continue here. So.
Yeah.
We didn't give it much thought at the time, but we had heard a loud roaring howl while we were picking. And having attributed it to being a bear at the time, neither of us had heard anything like it before when picking or at any other time in the woods. It got our attention, but sounded quite distant, so we kept picking. I remember only a couple of hours later, when I was reaching into this patch with my cutters, that a yellow jacket had stung me, but good on my ring finger. The finger started to swell virtually immediately. At that time, I knew I was not allergic or anything like that, and to be quite honest, there was nowhere to go for treatment, so we abandoned the berry hunt and went back to Old Betsy and to the first aid kit that we had in the vehicle. So Dave made a fire. We heated up some canned beef stew and beans while I put some ice from the cooler on my finger. I was going to tough it out for the night, if need be, and we would leave in the morning, had the swelling not gone away by then, and that's when the trouble began. Just as darkness had started to fall, we, having eaten, decided to catch some shut-eye laying down in the back of the wagon. I had turned off our battery-operated lantern, never using the interior lights on the cart to save the battery, and gone to sleep. At that time, I had a men's Timex watch that had the glow-in-the-dark numbers and hands on its face. And I remember opening my eyes and seeing it was 10:40 p.m. exactly, a moment in time I will never forget. David was sound asleep snoring, as I had just closed my eyes to do the same when the car lurched forward, causing David to awaken. I, of course, was still awake. I was already leaning on my elbow, it being pitch black, and David saying, "What was that?" He turned to switch the lantern back on, saying a bear must be outside sniffing around the car. We could not see a thing, the light from the lantern reflecting off the wagon's many windows, as we were now trying to focus on the exterior, when the back of the wagon's tailgate got slammed by something, and I saw a face through the back window. I had screamed, having seen a glimpse of a face out of a monster movie, as David launched himself into the front seat, started the car, and banged it into gear. All the seats in the back were laid down flat at the time, and when he hit the gas, I went flying. But neither he nor I cared. He cut the wheel and had floored it, spinning us around in a 180-degree turn, and there it was in the headlights, darting off the side of this dirt path. I do not know if this thing was afraid or just plain shocked by the turn of events and how the car had come to life, with rocks and dirt flying everywhere off the wheels. The automobile was swerving back and forth in the dirt as we fled. I yelled at David to slow down, saying the monster was well behind us now, not wanting to crash or worse in our escape, and he did. David had said, "What the hell was that thing?" And I answered that it was some kind of monster, knowing nothing about Bigfoot at the time. The glimpse I had of it in the rear window was that of a shadowy face of a ghoul, having a significant and yellowed grin and two large yellowy eyes. I could see its large and hairy arms against the back of the car, its head ducking down, appearing to me inside of the vehicle. When it hit the car, the wagon actually slid both forward and to the side a little bit, demonstrating the strength of whatever it was. It was like a vehicle slammed into us at a stop sign. What do you make of that, Kev?
Wow. I mean, crazy. Like, I could imagine it right down to the description of the Country Squire wagon. I was going to interrupt you and ask you if it had wood paneling on the sides, and indeed it did. And, of course, it had that maroon interior, that maroon vinyl. They all had that, I think.
Yeah, and, really the perfect scenario. I mean, she was spot on with saying, when you got nothing, you use what you got. And a big old wagon like that would be great to throw a couple of sleeping bags in and just crash out.
And by the way, that may be more comfortable than a lot of the old tents.
Yeah,
so I wouldn't say they had nothing.
No, but you're totally weatherproof, and like she said, you could start the car up and run a little heat if you wanted to.
Absolutely. But what makes it super frightening is you're in such a small environment, right? Like this car, even a wagon is still small, you're surrounded with glass and something is slamming into the vehicle. Like, you're so vulnerable.
Yeah, and she's saying, think of the power. Just think of the force to shift the car a little bit.
No doubt.
She didn't say a foot or two. She just said the car moved both forward and to the side.
Yeah, it's not a bird or a deer,
No, and what is a Country Squire wagon? They had to be a 5,500-pound car.
I was going to say thousands of pounds.
Yeah. So you don't just... Like
you weren't lightweight, with that fake wood on the side and all.
Now, everything back then had weight to it with the big old steel bumpers,
Absolutely.
You could bump a car right back then and basically not do any damage to it, you know.
But you can imagine how scary that would be. Terrifying. You're in there, you're sleeping in a sleeping bag surrounded by glass. The ceiling is only like a foot or a foot and a half above your head.
Yeah.
And then you're trying to scramble to the front seat, which you're also surrounded by glass.
I can picture this guy in his haste diving over. Well, I guess they would. I'm trying to recall the old wagons. I know you had that rear-facing seat that you could sit in and wave at the people behind you on the road.
Yeah, and that would fold down. So they were probably laying on top of where that would fold down, because that would fold down flush,
right,
with the back, and then they probably fold down the true rear seat, so you get a good 6 foot of sleeping area.
Yeah. Now, so would there have been another seat before the driver's seat that he had to hop over?
No, I think that they probably had that folded down, but you still got to hop over the driver's seat, right? It had that big bench.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. I'm just trying to visualize it, Kev. It's been a long time, man.
Yeah.
But I remember they were designed to fold down. You almost had like a pickup truck bed inside that you could slide something in if you needed to.
Oh, yeah. You could probably put a 4x8 sheet of plywood in there behind the seats.
It was amazing, wasn't it? Those big old tanks, man.
Big old wagon.
Wow, man. So what do you say? You want to do another one?
It's up to you, man.
All right, let's do it.
All right.
So this came from Harry Cummings, an Oregonian, and he says this: as you know, Bill, my family's history and heritage is that of what you would call medicine men and women, going back for hundreds of years. Most locations where we've been foraging have been held in secret within the family for the same length of time, some of which have a minimal time during the year in which we may harvest what's available. Some of the things I gather are grasses, bark, berries, mushrooms, and many other items used in what we call medicinal botanical remedies. Now, if you were to spend a day with me, I might travel 50 miles to a small patch of real estate just to access some herbs at a particular time of year. All of these things used to formulate poultices and supplements to combat sickness and disease. In layperson's terms, we are healers, using all natural products in the same ways and fashions for hundreds of years. During my travels, many of the mushrooms gathered were for food and medicinal purposes, and it was in the gathering of these that my evidence had been collected. As I said, there are times of year, weather conditions, and locations where these things grow. Some grow in and around living trees, while others thrive in dead wood. And still others grow in fields, near rivers and streams, all of these locations having been kept secret in the family for generations. There was and still is an area of heavily timbered woodland in which, during a time frame of, say, 90 days, depending on weather and rainfall, where there are two varieties of mushrooms available for harvesting. One which grows on specific dead wood, and the other in and around the base of certain trees, and particularly the sides of trees. This area covers about 100 acres, and you have to know where to look. Now, in over 50 years of doing this solo, I've never seen another human being in any of my many locations, which covers areas in 2 states. I have a nephew who also comes along with me, learning to carry on the tradition himself, and he would never go without me by his side. He is my student. It was throughout 2 seasons in this area that each time I arrived where the edibles were found, they had already been picked, with no remnants left at the scene indicating that they had been eaten on the spot. It was the first time this had ever happened, and I began to suspect that my location had been found out by some other gatherer, even though I had seen no one. By the way, these mushrooms were never known to be eaten by indigenous animals, so it was a mystery. Again, I must emphasize my teacher and those before her had been harvesting here without incident for hundreds of years. Very interesting. So I saw no evidence of activity near or around the pick sites indicating humans or animals having even been there. These growing locations were very specific. Tiny patches here and there, covering, as I said, a vast amount of acreage. And it had to be navigated and known to find them. Each site had been picked clean, as though whatever it was had a map of where I had been. The year after this happened, I was back again, hoping for a different result, which did occur on the first picking. Everything was there as it had always been, intact and available. And so I had chalked the first event up to have been being a bizarre season the year before. It was during my second entry into this forest where the problem began. Everything had been picked clean just like the year before, and I will tell you, I was angrier than you can imagine. I didn't own this place, but I felt in my heart as though I did. Generations of the family having been here before me, and I'm training my nephew to continue this tradition in this location, which is almost considered a sacred place to our people. Now, there are a lot of mushrooms in this region, many of which can kill you. Kill you on the spot, or at the very least, make you very sick. Some of which look like edible ones to the untrained eye. So knowing this, what was I to think? Other than another human being who had the same knowledge of the mushrooms that I did was at the root of this. All of that thinking was about to change. To reiterate, Bill, this had never happened before in my lifetime, and neither had any knowledge of it been passed down generationally. So this was a real event to this dude. Having been picked, some of these mushrooms grow back very quickly, given that the same natural circumstances are still present in the area for them to thrive. So I decided to beat the intruder at their own game and show up earlier than they would to get the prize. Several weeks had passed. Excuse me. And this area was soaked by rain for 10 days. I went back on day 8 while it was still raining. I usually went when the weather was good, making my life a little easier. And the mushrooms did not care one way or the other. Excuse me just for a second. Wanted to clear my throat. Little scratchy. What I found was incredible. On the first down tree that I approached, the mushrooms were already picked. And by the look of things, possibly even that day. There were crumbs on the ground that had fallen from them. But that was not all. In the now rain-soaked moss and peat were large, shoeless footprints, coming to the log and going away from it, and I knew it was a Sasquatch. I quickly tracked what I believed was the same individual Sasquatch from location to location, and the results were the same. At one of the log sites, the heads of white grubs were visible on and near the log. The creature had eaten the entire body except for the head, which I thought was quite interesting at the time. This thing had the intelligence and cognitive skill to know good from bad. At this point, I'm embarrassed to say what I'm about to say. Even I, as a Native American and healer living as a modern man, had reservations about the teachings regarding the Ancient Ones or Sasquatch. Having never seen one in all my days in the woods for decades, I had personal reservations about it being real. But this had changed everything. The following season, all was back to normal. I now believe this solo creature had either moved on or perhaps even died because all of the mushroom snatching had ended. Bizarre, Kev, huh?
Yeah. Little taste for the fungi.
Well, food is food.
Oh, yeah.
And, I guess, he was using these things for medicinal botanicals. That's the second time I heard that term. In my book, UFO Sightings Encounters, which I recommend to any of my listeners, a lot of really good UFO encounters in there, including my own. There was a man down somewhere in South America. I think it was in some woodland area in southern Mexico. He was with a group of college students collecting medicinal botanicals. So interesting, though, Kev, huh? He finds the footprints and the crumbs and the grubs with just the head left. So this thing was biting through. A lot
of evidence, for sure.
Yeah. Interesting. And there you have it. No physical sighting, but prints, stolen goods.
Put out an APB.
Yeah, well, he's saying, interesting, Noha, was this thing watching him? Or did it have the same knowledge he did of sniffing out these things, perhaps, or whatever, He's
that it could tell the poison from the safe, right?
Well, I mean, look, you look at deer and stuff walking around in the woods. They have an innate ability to know what they can eat. You don't see deer laying dead all over the place because they mistakenly ate something that was
generally they have such a keen sense of smell. Mm-hmm. They could probably smell the bad part of the mushroom where we can't, for example.
Do you think they could smell me?
Probably from a distance. Depending on the day.
And depending how many days have gone by since I last showered.
Yeah, perhaps.
I like to take a shower, say, every 4 or 5 days.
Whether you need it or not.
Well, just especially if I'm doing anything automotive, I have to clean the hands off once in a while, so I do the whole body. So that's it, man. A couple of really and what a fascinating couple of accounts, huh? One, medicinal botanicals, someone gathering herbs and barks and things, and the other people out berry picking, both having some type of encounter with the Sasquatch creature.
Hey, these creatures got to eat, Bill.
Yeah, I know this creature has to eat.
Exactly.
So what do we got in our listener mail, Kev?
Yeah, we got some good listener mail this week. First one goes back to our story and stories about the New Jersey drones. So we asked people, if you see something, say something. And this woman, Lisa from New Jersey, wrote in. She says, "Hi, guys. Love your podcast. I live in central New Jersey in Middlesex County, and we have been seeing all types and sizes of these mystery drones here. I looked out of my second-story bathroom window last week, and I saw one flying past my street. Triangular in shape, 2 white lights, 1 red. If I hadn't looked, I would have never known it was there, as it made virtually no noise at all. I called my local police department, and the officer said, 'We know they are here. There is nothing we can do about it. Please contact the FBI.' I failed to mention the size of this thing. It was comparable to a small car. I still can't believe it. First the Jersey Devil, then Bigfoot, now UFOs. They don't have a magazine called Weird New Jersey for nothing. Thanks, guys." Good stuff, right, Bill? Bill?
Yeah, can you hear me, Kev?
Now I can.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Good stuff. We appreciate our listeners, and Kev, tell the people how they can get a hold of us if they want to write in.
Yeah, go to our website, BigfootTerrorInTheWoods.com, and click on the Contact Us link, and you will send an email. It'll go to my brother, WJ, and once in a while he sends me one.
Yeah, I go through, and folks, if I don't get back to you personally, don't take offense to it. There's a lot of things going in there and a lot of things just generally going on in my life and Kevin's life as well, So we do read through them, and then we'll just handpick, certain ones. Or Kevin picks. Sometimes I tell Kev, read this one, especially if it came from somebody I had contacted. They were getting back to me. And by the way,
and sometimes he says, "Don't read this one," and I often read that one too.
Not true. And by the way, guys, really, I reach out to a lot of people who get in touch with me about purported sightings and encounters. And Kev, it's amazing to me how many people spend the time to contact me. And I reach out to them and never hear from them again.
Yeah.
So I don't know why that is. Why would you spend the time to say, "Hey, WJ, thus and thus happened to me. Give me a call. Here's my number," and then not respond back?
I think folks are just busy, Bill. Maybe they have second thoughts too. Maybe they tell someone, one of their friends or relatives, "Hey, I reached out to Bill. I'm going to tell him the story," and they're like, "What, are you crazy? You're going to lose your job if you tell that story."
Mm-hmm.
Who knows?
Yeah, it's a weird. This whole Sasquatch thing, the whole investigatory process is a little strange.
Could be anything, though, right?
Yeah, no, there's no doubt about it.
Yeah. Cool. Well, that's it this week, Bill.
Okay. Well,
good stuff.
Folks, obviously, after hearing these two accounts, if you find yourself wandering around in the woods, Washington State or Oregon, as Kevin already said, he personally was wearing jingle bells, verifying what this woman had said about her berry picking. If you find yourself walking around in these woods of Oregon, Washington, or anywhere else for that matter, you best remember one thing, my friends. Always carry more gun than you think you're going to need. Sleep tight. Fantastic.